End-user documentation should be easy to read and easy to comprehend. To achieve that, we have to look at the layout of the page, the types of fonts we are going to use, and how we are going to place the graphics. But first of all, let's look at what really the dimensions is we are going to of the printed document, or if we use PDF, what the dimensions are of the page. Now, the dimensions of the page are normally the A4 dimensions we use, which is 210 millimeters by 297 millimeters. And it has also been found that if the block of text has the same ratio as the paper it is printed on, then the whole document looks a lot more balanced and you might have a better reader comprehension. So we have to know the ratio of the height to width, which is 0.71, or the ratio of the width to height, which is 1.41. So for example, if the height of your text block is to be 200 millimeters, then of course the width is going to be 200 by 0.71, which is 142 millimeters. And now we have a block of text that is 142 millimeters by 200 millimeters, which is approximately the same ratio as the A4 paper size. What does that mean for our margins? To have a block of text, what we normally should use is about a line width that has about 70 characters or 7 to 9 average sized words, which is deemed to be the optimum width of any printed document for readability and uptake. Anything larger and it becomes more difficult to read, anything smaller and the document becomes too large in terms of the number of pages. So that is a good compromise. To achieve that, we need then a left and right margin. To achieve that, we need a block of text to be about 120 millimeters and a left and right margin of 50 millimeters and 40 millimeters. I gave the left margin a little bit more so you can bind the document, but there is nothing stopping you making it 45 millimeters on both sides, which is a margin, a total margin of 90 millimeters, and of course 90 plus 120 makes 210, which is of course the width of the paper. Now, to have the proper ratio of the A4, and you apply the formula, that would then give us a height, a block text height of approximately 205 millimeters, and that would give a top and bottom margin of 50 millimeters and 45 millimeters respectively. Again, I gave the top margin a little bit more because it gives you might need a header in there and you might need a little bit more information in the top margin, and it seems to be a practice to make the bottom margin smaller than the top margin. Let's look at the type of fonts. There are 3 types of fonts that we as IT professionals are going to use, and that is a serif font, that is a sans serif font, and a monospaced font. Now, what is the difference between serif and sans serif? There are little decorations on the end of each letter of a serif font, and we call them serifs, and those decorations are missing in a sans serif font. A monospaced font is where the spaces in between the letters is exactly the same, whereas the spaces between the letters in serif and sans serif can vary, just to make the word looks a bit more readable. We tend to use the monospaced fonts for the coding that we want to use, or the coding that we want to display in our document, end user document. Serif fonts are used for blocks of text. You look at any book that is printed, any block of text in a book is always in serif font, because serif fonts read easier than sans serif font. The reason being that in a sans serif font it tends to force the user or the reader to look at each individual letter. So a sans serif font is very good if you want to put a focus on one line, which normally is the heading of a chapter or a paragraph that we give a new heading. So we tend to use a sans serif font for that, but for the block of text we use a serif font, and for the code that we are going to type in our document we use a monospaced font. Right, what we have to do now is decide which serif font to use and which sans serif font to use. Once you have decided on a serif font, then a way to select the right sans serif font is by looking at the word H in both uppercase and lowercase. Now I've selected here H as an Georgia serif. I've selected a Trebuchet sans serif, and as an example I've also put in an Arial. Now let's look at the G. What you do is you look at the G, at the pattern of the G, and if you look that in Georgia and you compare that with the one in Trebuchet, you see that the letters approximately look the same. Similarly for the A and the E. They seem to be approximately balanced except for the serifs. But if you look at Arial, that is a totally different shape. So the best combination to use for your headings and your blocks of text in this particular case is Trebuchet and Georgia. There is also one proviso. If the block of text is to be used mainly for reading on the screen, people still tend to use sans serif fonts because serifs don't always come display clearly on the screen, especially the older type screens. However, the screens are now getting of such quality that they almost mimic the paper. But if you are worried about it, use a sans serif font for blocks of text if the document is purely going to be read on a screen. Georgia was actually designed as an in-between font, in between a serif and a sans serif. The serifs on Georgia are not as flourished as the other serifs are on other serif fonts, and as a consequence Georgia actually reads quite well on the screen because, as I said before, it was specifically designed as a type of serif font for screen reading. Let's now look at placing the graphics. We tend to read our page and scan our page from the top left-hand corner to the bottom right-hand corner. Now that has implications for how we place the graphics. If the graphics is more important than the text, then we place the graphics on the top left-hand corner and the bottom right-hand corner. We place the pictures on the top left-hand corner and on the bottom right-hand corner, and we place the text in the remaining spaces. However, if the text is more important than the pictures, we place the text in the top left-hand corner and the bottom right-hand corner, and of course we place the pictures in the remaining spaces. We can also have combinations where we have one text being more important than the picture, and in the other case the picture being more important than the text, or the picture is even far more important than the text, and you get a totally different balance of the page. Now the other thing that will happen a lot in our case is where the picture is placed in the middle with text above and below it, but always make sure in that combination the picture is placed in the middle.